And we are back on Sportsman Radio. I'm your host, Chris Shanafelt, and I am now joined by the director of Raw Deal, A Question of Content, Cocaine Cowboys 2, The U, Square Grouper, Limelight, and his latest project, which was played on ESPN's 30 for 30 just last week, Broke. Billy, how's it going, man?
Thanks for having me.
It's an honor, man. You are the first producer I have had on my show in my 90 episodes, so I want to start off this interview by asking you, how did you become a producer?
Well, I was always a film buff, along with my friends growing up in Miami, watching movies together, and I think it was just a matter of pursuing something that we loved. Went on to study political science and screenwriting at the University of Miami. Another best friend of mine, David Sipkin, who would eventually become the co-founder of our company, Raconteur, in Miami Beach. He went on to the FSU film school, which I hate to say is one of the best film schools in the country. I always hate to mention when the Knowles beat the Canes, but in this department, they do. It's an exceptional film school, and he was incredibly well trained. And when we all wound up back in Miami together, we started a company. We actually started our first company when we were sophomores in high school, making movies. But we went pro, if you will, after we graduated college in about 2000, and we wound up becoming, at the time, the youngest filmmakers in the history of the Sundance Film Festival with our movie Raw Deal, A Question of Consent, which was about the alleged rape of a stripper at the Delta Chi fraternity house at the University of Florida in Gainesville, which was completely caught on videotape. And we made a documentary about that. Like I said, went to Sundance with it, and then did Cocaine Cowboys, which was a great success on Showtime when it aired, and before that on home video. And then we did The U for ESPN 30 for 30. I'm skipping around a little bit. There were some other projects in between, but these are kind of the ones that people recognize. And so 30 for 30 Volume 1, as it's now called. We did The U, the University of Miami Championship football history. And that became the highest-rated doc at the time that ESPN had ever had. The 30 for 30 series won a Peabody Award, and we got invited back to do Broke for ESPN again.
Nice, and that is your latest documentary, Broke. It was played last week on ESPN, and it's pretty much stories about professional athletes who at one point made a good amount of money and then went broke. And I heard an interview with you on YouTube. You said that some of the professional sports leagues, they didn't allow you to use any of their footage or any of their work. Is that correct?
Yeah, the NBA, Major League Baseball, and the NHL refused to give us permission to use their footage in the movie because of the subject matter.
And how did you work around that?
Surgically. I mean, things got a little messy during post-production, I think, because of limitations like that. Ultimately, the movie's not really about sports
Right.
per se. It's really about we zoom in on this particularly elite group of high income people, specifically professional athletes, but it's really kind of set against the backdrop of America's last boom and bust cycle. So it's really kind of a lesson in an entertaining lesson, I think, but a lesson nonetheless in economics and budgeting, and I think there's a message there for all of us, even those of us or most of us who don't ever make $1 million, in one paycheck in our lives. There's lessons there to be learned about how not to spend your money.
How difficult was it for you and your team to get these former athletes to agree to let you interview them and talk about this negative part of their life?
Well, first and foremost, not all the athletes we interviewed have gone broke. Some of them are success stories. In the case of Jamal Mashburn, Homer Bush, even Bernie Kosar, who is now, since the movie has gone from rags to riches again. So not all the guys were there to put forth their lives as cautionary tales. Each of them, though, had experience in this area because they did make a lot of money as athletes. They did experience some of the pitfalls and the issues that high income people, particularly those who have sudden wealth events, experience. The pressures and the pitfalls. So it was not easy to get people to talk about this. To answer your question, for some, it's a sensitive subject, and athletes are a prideful group of people. Obviously, they want their triumphs to be shared with the world. They're less enthusiastic to share their feelings, but I really do have a lot of respect and admiration for the guys who did sit down and talk to us on camera, whether it was to share their mistakes or their successes, because it's a subject that people were not enthusiastic to share.
And what was it about this subject that made you want to create a documentary about it?
Well, first when we were working on the U for ESPN 30 for 30, we'd interviewed quarterback Bernie Kosar, who features very prominently in that movie and also in Broke, and we interviewed him in the spring of 2009. And literally within about 2 months of that interview, it was front page news in Miami that Bernie Kosar had been going through a horrendous bankruptcy over the past several weeks and months, including the time that we had interviewed him, and it really broke my heart. He's an incredibly nice and generous man, perhaps generous to a fault, as we discovered in some of the details of his bankruptcy. And so that really struck me on a personal level about Bernie going broke, because he was extremely successful, both in 12 seasons in the NFL. He made a lot of money, and after he retired, he was one of the success stories in business after playing professional ball. So when he went bankrupt, it was kind of like, well, if it can happen to him, it can happen to anyone. And then there was also that Sports Illustrated story by Pablo Torre, who we interviewed and Broke, where they published those shock statistics that said 78% of NFL players within 2 years of retirement and 60% of NBA players within 5 years of retirement suffer severe financial hardships or even file for bankruptcy. So when I read that, it was kind of the 1-2 punch of the personal story and then the macro big picture story of that Sports Illustrated article that said, well, wow, maybe there's something here worth exploring further, maybe even an epidemic.
Billy, I really enjoyed the film Broke, and that's one of the reasons why I invited you onto my show. What are some of the reviews that you have gotten about the film?
I think that they've been incredibly positive, particularly from current and former athletes. I think it wasn't a surprise for a lot of them, obviously, the movie, because they've heard the horror stories through the years, but this was an opportunity to take all of the previous reporting that's been done, whether it's Sports Illustrated or OTL or SportsCenter, and kind of put it all together and synthesize it in what I hope is an entertaining and engaging way that people can look at as kind of a cautionary tale about about how not to handle this kind of success. And one of the most moving reactions that I saw to the movie, because thanks to Twitter, which is how you and I got in touch, thanks to Twitter, you have this kind of real-time reaction to the movie while it's on. So you're getting immediate reaction from LeBron James and Dwayne Wade and Magic Johnson, and it's a little overwhelming, but even more so than those kind of legendary and A-list athletes, someone, while the movie was still on, compiled in a blog post some of the tweets coming from college basketball players and their comments and their interactions with each other while they were watching the movie. And some of them were very funny, the observations they were making. But what I found kind of moving about it was that they were acknowledging that they are not going to make these mistakes, that they're taking the lessons here to heart and are going to try to ensure that they live their lives more responsibly, focus on education, focus on a future after the game, and focus on saving and learning how to say no so that they can continue to support themselves and their families after they retire. And that was the whole reason for the movie to begin with, was to examine this possible epidemic of professional athletes going broke, and hopefully, and I think this is why the guys who gave us interviews in the movie did it, was to tell their stories to the next generation of players and let them know that they don't have to make the same mistakes, that they can do it differently, they can do it even better. And to see that message was getting through was very heartening for me.
Yeah, I believe the movie played last Wednesday, and when I was on Twitter that night, the only thing I would see on my timeline were tweets about your film, man. That's awesome. And I've seen a lot of good things about your film. I enjoyed it. I actually watched it just this past Saturday. It was awesome. I got to ask you, Billy, are you working on any new films?
Oh, well, certainly. We've got a new movie that we've been working on actually for 2 years, over 2 years, I should say, called Dogfight. That's D-A-W-G, Dogfight. I just want to clarify that. It's not about Michael Vick or anything like that. But in southwest Miami-Dade, there's a neighborhood called West Perrine, which is the neighborhood that Kimbo Slice, the MMA star, came out of, and he had inspired a whole new generation of guys to literally take to the backyards in illegal, unsanctioned, bare-knuckle brawls that they film and put on YouTube. And one particular guy who traveled for a year as Kimbo's bodyguard, he became the Don King of the backyards and started promoting these events that became first very high profile in the neighborhood, and then became high profile all over the world, and by building a 12 by 12 ring in his backyard and inviting people in the neighborhood to come over to these events where hundreds of people would sometimes come to watch these illegal fights. And as soon as it became famous on an international level, the Florida Boxing Commission started to crack down, and we followed these guys for a year and a half, and some of them go pro in the MMA right from this backyard, which is incredible. And other guys that we followed in the movie, I'll put it to you this way, they don't live to the end of the shoot. They don't live to ever have the opportunity to go pro. It's a pretty rough neighborhood, and it's a pretty compelling story. And we're working on that and 2 new Cocaine Cowboys releases, all of those will come out in 2013.
Wow, I'm looking forward to it, man. I really am. Billy, I appreciate your time. Before I let you go, is there anything you'd like to plug on the air for our listeners?
Yeah, just if they want to follow us and see what we're up to, they can come to cocainecowboys.com or follow me on Twitter, Billy Corben, Corben.
Billy, once again, thanks so much. Hope to keep in touch with you. Thanks for coming on to the show, man. Take care.
Anytime. Thanks for having me.
All right, take care.